this session's about alternatives to oil and gas heating. We're going to mention wood, but a lot of the conversations will be about heat pumps. Heat pumps are rather like an air conditioner in reverse. They use electricity to run a pump, which then takes heat from the air, or it can be the ground or a water source like a river, which then heats water to go around your radiators. It's greener than oil and gas if we use renewable electricity, and it's generally thought will be one of the main solutions to getting people off fossil fuel heating. Our speakers this evening are 5 local people: Nick, Tim, Anne, Nick number 2, and Owena. We also have Jason from Ohm Energy, a local installer, who I'm hoping can answer the difficult questions. They'll each give a short presentation. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box. That's the icon on the bottom of your screen, and you can resize the box and move it around to where you want on your screen. We'll take any immediate questions about the specific presentation straight after it, but otherwise we'll ask our householders or Jason to respond more fully after the speakers have finished. So we'll begin with Nick Rouse, who is the only one of our presenters to have installed a ground source heat pump.
Hello, this is our house, mid-Victorian, and like many locally of that age, solid brick walls downstairs and timber frame upstairs, tile hung outside and lath and plaster inside. Originally it was 2 up and 2 down, and a single-storey lean-to extension was added at the rear in Victorian times, and the extension you can see to the right, with the bedroom and a bathroom upstairs and a garage downstairs, was added by us in 1990. There is no gas locally and little room for an oil or gas tank in the house. The original anthracite boiler was replaced by a ground source heat pump and solar thermal system that I installed myself in 2004 and 2005. The solar thermal system heats only the domestic hot water. A 2-way diverter valve lets the heat pump heat either the underfloor heating or the domestic hot water. A buffer tank prevents short cycling of the heat pump by heating it up a little more at night, shifts more of the electricity to off-peak. There are immersion heaters in both the buffer tank and the hot water, domestic hot water, for the rare occasions that the other heating is inadequate. On the left is the Wiesman heat pump, seen before all the heat pipes were insulated. At the bottom right, you can see the 4 black pipes with white clips at the ends of the slinkies going down through the floor and out into the garden. At left is the 300-litre buffer tank, and you can see top left at the back of the tank the immersion heater. The performance figures for the pump show that when pumping heat uphill by 40 degrees from the garden to the underfloor heating, the coefficient of performance is 4, meaning that I get a full 11 kilowatts of heat from 2.7 kilowatts of electricity. This is 50% of the absolute limit, the Carnot limit, and shows the importance of keeping the heating water as cool as possible and the outside heat source as warm as possible, despite you cooling it. There's just enough room in the back garden for the required 100-metre run of slinkies at minimum spacing. To increase the groundwater flow and hence the heat flow from the ground to heat up the pump, the ditch was filled with sand up to the top of the slinkies. The heat to warm the pipes, despite the heat pump cooling them down, does not come to any great extent from geothermal heat coming up, but almost entirely from solar energy absorbed by the ground coming down. At a coefficient of performance of 4, my heating is therefore 25% electrical and 75% solar, and the solar energy is stored in the ground summer to winter. There are 2 solar thermal vacuum systems facing southeast and southwest to give a long heating period during the day. It is unusual in that the domestic hot water is circulated directly and fed back in coaxially to the hot water outlet at the top of the tank. There is no second indirect coil needed in the tank. Because this means that antifreeze cannot be used, in very cold weather, the pump is turned on to pump a little heat back out of the tank to the tubes. There's underfloor heating throughout the house with separate controls for each area. There are battens or joists upstairs to support the flooring, and between them there is 50 millimeters of foam insulation. The heating pipes are clipped down onto the foam at about 20 millimeter centers. To spread the heat laterally, a very weak dry sand and cement mix is used, rather than the normal aluminium spreader paints. Bamboo flooring is used, which is thin, strong, thermally stable and conducts heat well. Water at 28 degrees C is sufficient to heat the house in winter, and you can see this working, the infrared image at the top. The result is that the total house energy is less than half the total local average, and the average, and nearly half of that is solar energy. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's great. Somebody's already asked, what's a slinky, please?
Slinkers are the pipes curled round in loops. So the loops are about 1 meter diameter, and each loop is moved on about half a pitch, so half a loop. So it progresses along in loops. Now, some people put the loops horizontal, some put them vertical, and my ones are vertical.
Mm-hmm. So you said somewhere on one of your diagrams that it's sufficient to heat the house up to 19 degrees. Is that sufficient?
Yes. Yeah, for 38 degree heating
water.
Water.
Hotter, you can't get it hotter, can you?
I could.
Oh, you could?
Yeah, I set my thermostat at 19.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right, we've got another question. What do your bills look like?
Bills, the cost? Well, it's all electricity, and I pay about 17 pence.
Yeah, but how much per how much per year is it roughly? Roughly.
Well, it's about 3,000 by 17 pence, whatever that comes out at.
I don't think my maths is good enough. But it's up that under £300 a year.
Something like that. And that's less than I earn from the feed-in tariff. So all in all, because that's all of my fuel bills, including my car fuel, because it's heated at home, is a fair bit less than the feed-in tariff. So all in all, my heat bills are negative.
Okay, it sounds very little actually, just under 300. I hope I've got that right. But if you say you're using 300,000 kilowatt hours, and
3,000 at 17 pence a kilowatt.
Yeah, that's £510.
Oh, is it? Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And that's is it? Oh, well, anyway, whatever. All right, but it's still pretty good. Thank you, somebody, for doing that. My poor brain isn't working very well.
Can I ask a question, please? I don't know whether my chat's come up on the screen. It's whether or not. What I've asked is the heating of the water from the thermal roof element. Is that done electrically or directly?
No, it is thermal. The solar thermal heat heats up the water in the tubes, and that heat is then transferred down into the tank. So the controller, you may have seen the little cream-coloured controller. Every time the water in the tubes is more than 6 degrees hotter than the water in the tank, it switches on the pump and brings the hot water down. And once it gets down to only 3 degrees hotter than the tank, it switches off and lets the tubes heat up again. So in midsummer, it's going on and off quite, every minute or so. in really hot weather, and in autumn, then the heating cycles go down to the minutes between them.
We'll come back to them, about how loud it is, the cost, and what sort of insulation and draft proofing you did. But you need to answer those questions in a very short space at the end. So lovely. Next, actually, it's Tim himself is going to tell us about his house.
I've got a kind of typical but untypical house, I guess. 1973 bungalow. Fairly standard construction of tile roof, some flat roof, cavity filled walls. As you can see here, I put 12 solar panels on the front there because that's the only space we've got. I would say and this is a kind of plan of the house itself, which you can see. So this was bought with eco renovation in mind. Where I live out in the countryside, in Rodmell, there is no mains gas. So we really had to think, what were we going to do? And we'd been thinking about maybe buying a plot of land and building on there. But as most people know, that's very expensive and difficult to find plots of land. So we eventually found this house that seems to be of the right era that you could renovate it, and it had quite big openings, some quite big windows and stuff. And also it wasn't too difficult from a kind of planning point of view. As I said, a non-listed status. So this is just a shot of the living area. Julia said that we needed to put some pictures, nice pretty pictures on the inside to show everybody. But as you can see, there is quite a big window there that provides a lot of light. So I need to talk a little bit about the solar panels, and I know this isn't strictly a power presentation, but it does inform the whole reason that we put in the air source heat pump, because at the time it was the kind of golden period where you could get some quite good feed-in tariff payments as well as the renewable heat incentive. And as the government promised that to lock that in for 25 years, we were lucky enough to get the kind of top rate, which I think is now like 47p a unit. And what that meant is that we would be earning quite a decent amount of money. And so you can see I spent 10,000 on the panels themselves, and that would be paid off. So generating the electricity, but more than that, generating the money that the PV would give us, meant that running an all-electric heating system would kind of work well for us. It's also good to notice here that we use the Parity Trust as a cheap loan scheme. They do loans for kind of eco renovations. So I'm going to circulate that information in the information sheet to everybody at the end in case you need to look them up. But it was how we finance stuff. We didn't have the cash to pay for these things. So creating the space for the heat source, the engineer came round, said, okay, you need to put it somewhere that's going to be close enough for the pipes to get into the tank. And so we found this little corner, one part of the house, and the only thing we had to do was to create a concrete base for it. And as I have a few skills in that area, that's something that I did myself, so that was quite cheap. And then, as I said, we had to think about how we were going to heat it, but it was kind of easy in one way for us because we didn't have any central heating. We only had these terrible electric heaters on the walls from the 1980s, which were very inefficient and very expensive. But it did mean that we had to install all the radiators from scratch. So on the one hand, that cost us a lot more, but on the other hand, the radiators you need for air source are recommended to be 30% bigger because it's a low temperature heating system, so it gives you a greater surface area in which to distribute the heat. Typically the radiators are only about 30 degrees hot, whereas I think an oil-based or gas-based hot water system for radiators runs at about 70 degrees. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what I remember. So we were recommended to install 14 kilowatts for the size of the house, and that's what we did. So we had quite a lot of disruption at first to install everything, but one of the upsides, again, from starting from scratch, apart from the radiators, was that we had the unvented tank, which meant that we had lots of hot water, but also with mains pressure. And so, and here's a shot of the radiators just to show the size. So I guess the best thing about this, apart from claiming lots more hot water, was that the solar panels, with the heat incentive and the feed-in tariff, essentially mean that we don't pay any electricity bills. So I'm aware that in today's world that is not a scenario that people can countenance, but it was a strong reason for us to go on an all-electric system at the time. I think the cost of solar panels has come down quite a lot now, so if you were to finance it yourself, it would be cheaper.
I think you're done, Tim. I think we're through time-wise, aren't we?
Okay, thank you. And just to say that we do actually make a small surplus on the cost of everything, but again, I understand that that isn't, going to be typical for most people nowadays.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Now, does anybody have any questions? I've got a question for Tim, if not.
Sure.
So, do you think this air source heat pump would have worked as well if you hadn't done all that extension? Because you did a lot of extensive insulation to your walls, didn't you?
Yes, so I wasn't required to talk about that as part of this particular presentation, but we did have all the outside of the house, apart from the front bit you can see here, covered with external wall insulation, about 70 millimeters thick. Yes, I think the air source wouldn't have worked so well. Generally speaking, it is a little bit more expensive to heat, but if you do it in a house which is very well insulated, we've got about 300 mil of insulation in the loft, and like I say, 70 mil kind of jacket around the house. And where we couldn't do it on the outside, we did it on the inside. And that makes a big difference. So when we do heat the house, it does stay in.
Somebody called Rachel has asked, we've got a little house with a loft conversion. Can we fit this in? I'm not sure what you mean fit this in. You wouldn't put it in the loft. It would go outside.
Yes, the heat pump has to go outside, and it draws on the cold air and converts it into hot air or heat.
Well, it takes the heat out of the cold air.
Yeah, sorry, it takes the heat out of the cold air.
Right. Well, thank you. I think we might move on if that's all right.
I've got a question. Can
sure.
I ask it?
Yeah, sure.
Please. In one of the pictures of your house, there seemed to be a solid fuel boiler. Is that still there, or have you removed it?
We still have a log burner. Yes,
yeah.
That was just something we put in because we liked it. It's but it's not strictly necessary, but it's a nice to have. And on very few times that the heat pump hasn't worked, I think once in 10 years we've had an issue, then we could in fact turn on the heat the home with wood.
Okay, I think I've noted the questions that have come up, but they're good questions, and I think they apply to part of the overall discussion at the end. So I'd quite like to move on to the next person, which is Anne. Anne, are you ready to talk about your house? Are you unmuted, Anne? Anne?
Yes, I'm unmuted now.
Okay, all right.
Coin a phrase. Well, you can see this is a small semi-detached house. One of the things, it's 2 bedrooms. one of the things that we did was put a lot of internal in the roof and external insulation. You can see a bit of that in a way because we put it round that dormer that you can see. So it's about nearly 20 centimeters of thickness, and also we increased the insulation over that flat extension as well. Next.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, something I ought to say is that it was originally heated by gas, including a gas fire. We renovated in 2009, and we are now at something of a turning point. I wanted to mention the sun space or conservatory. It's designed to catch the sun, especially. I'm very proud that it's built of local laminated coppice chestnut, because that gets heat from the sun, even some on days like this. In the middle of winter, you get sun, and soon you can open the doors into the house, and that heat comes flowing in, but not when it's grey, of course. It's got insulated brick walls and a thick layer of insulation under the solid floor. Next. The wood burner was our main source of heat. This was into, when we felt that wood burning was the best thing to do, and we're told that was the case. And it's in the living room. It's large, it's 20 kilowatts, and it heats water for radiators and washing. And there's a jacket containing water around the burning chamber, and hot water rises into the bathroom, and that's where the big tank is. So that's the next slide, please. Next, please. A heat store, and 300 litres. It's quite tall. That doesn't show the whole height. And we put some extra insulation around it. It's really complicated because it receives water directly from the jacket around the wood burner, but also it receives heat via a heat exchanger from the solar hot water, and we have a small backup gas boiler, which we do use more now than we did for all sorts of reasons. And I insulated it with a lot of extra insulation to kind of bring it up to date about 3 years ago. So yeah, it's got a lot of pipes going in and out of it. Slide 5, please. Next slide. So we've got solar hot water. This does work with a fluid with antifreeze in that goes via a pump and a heat exchanger to the heat store. We get some heat even in the winter. It doesn't fully heat that 300 litre tank. So sometimes we need to put the gas on for 10 minutes in the summer, in the sort of mid-season times as well. But just only the other day when the sun was shining, maybe even today, the solar, the pump came on because it was supplying heat from the sun even today. So slide 6, last slide. We've more than halved energy demand, but I wish it were better. We're planning to get an air source heat pump, surprise, surprise, because in a more urgent climate change situation, we should not be burning so much wood, even though it is replaced by new carbon when trees grow. And we do use the best wood we can. it'll also be less work and provide an even background heat, we hope. We're getting more solar PV panels in preparation for greater electricity use. I'd also suggest that people look at Warmer Sussex, who will do a whole house assessment. I don't know how many people have tried that, but we've done a bit of it, but not entirely. They're doing a webinar on the 16th of February, which is worth. I think Julia's going to put information.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. That's it then. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention I'm just putting it in the chat box. Anne wrote a very interesting article in the last Transition Town Lewes newsletter about, is it time to stop burning wood? You know, because there's always this debate, should I have a log burner, or is that the right thing to do now? But it's not clear cut, but do have a look at Anne's article. I've just put the link in there, and I'll put a link into the Warmer Home Sussex. We didn't know they were doing these webinars, but they're about eco retrofits, and the first one I think is next Wednesday, 14th, isn't it?
16th.
16th, is it? Okay, the day 2 days before our next one.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. It's okay. It's going to be a series of. Also, I'll put the link in a minute. I was going to just ask you, Anne. No, I wasn't going to ask you anything else. No.
Question again, please.
Does somebody else? Yes, please do ask.
I noticed from your descriptions you don't seem to be using electricity, either for heat purposes, including water. Is that correct?
We're not using electricity to heat water, no, except the kettle.
Any other questions? If not, we can always take some more later. But let's go on to we've got Nick W. Hello, Nick. Would you like to? Nick's in lives in the centre of Lewes, so it's a different scenario.
Right, Tim, I'm assuming you're going to slot illustrations in as and when, so I have no idea what's going to be coming up. I'm going to read out my script, which is pretty much what you've seen earlier, and I suppose we'll take part of that. Does that sound sensible?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, right, here we go. A bit of background first. We bought our house in 2004 after we'd been searching for 2 years, having lived in Lewes earlier. We used to live on the north side of town in Abinger Place, and I learned then about the importance of different microclimates in Lewes. North of the castle is cold, so when we were looking for a site, there it is, the little beauty, we were looking for somewhere on the south side of Lewes on a south-facing slope and somewhere central. This was the house we came up with, Owlette Cottage in St Martin's Lane. Built in the 1960s, no insulation whatsoever, a wood wall roof which was failing. What was great about it, it was so ugly in the conservation area that we had a pretty free hand in remodelling it and changing the external appearance. So because of the south-facing aspect and the steep slope, it made sense to locate the main living spaces on the first floor. And an open plan layout and a 9-metre wide south-facing window. I think that has to be the widest window in Lewes. And not only maximised the panoramic view of the downs, but also brought light deep into the house and allowed us to make the most of passive solar gain in the winter months. Toilets, bathrooms and larder were located on the north side of the house, so that no windows were required on this cold elevation. All habitable rooms face south, east or west. We replaced the worn out flat roof with a traditional pitched roof, which provided us with overflow accommodation when needed, as well as a studio workshop and generous storage. Just to give you a feel for the size, when we lived in our house in Abinger Place, the total size of that house, a typical Lewes terrace house, was about 85 square metres, that's 900 square feet. This house is bigger, it's 216 square metres or 2,325 square feet. So it's about 2.5 times bigger than our terrace house. So let's cut to the chase, the air source heat pump, which we put in in November 2017. It's a 16 kilowatt Samsung EHS heating system, and it replaced a gas-fired condensing boiler. The company that installed it went bust very shortly afterwards when the government reduced and phased out the subsidies, so we didn't have anybody to look after us, and one of the first things we had to do was get further cover so that our guarantee was maintained, which we did. To go back to how we got it in there, a heating engineer surveyed our house because, as somebody has said, radiators with air source heat pumps run at much lower temperatures, and assessed which radiators would have to be made bigger. In the event, only 3 had to be changed, and we were able to keep most of the existing steel radiators. Here's a challenge for you, Tim. There's a plant room containing a large hot water storage cylinder, pumps and controls in a guest bedroom close to the air source heat pump, which is just outside. Plant room is about 1.8 meters by 750 mil. That's 6 foot by 2 foot 6. Probably larger than it need be, but the Polish plumber who set it out was determined to do a showcase installation, and we let him do the layout before we actually built the surrounding structure. I think usage is important because with our gas-fired boiler, we used to heat our house from 7 till 10:30 in the morning. We would go through the day with it off, and we would turn it on again at 6 in the evening until 10:30. And we might put it on at lunchtime. We were feeling wimpish. We run the air source heat pump from 7 in the morning until 10:30 at night, continuously through the day. And shamefully, we run the house at 21 degrees C because that is comfortable and we're there all the time. We also have a wood burning stove in our open plan living room, but that's mainly there to provide visual cheer and a bit of a treat.
Thank you, Nick. Is that it? Okay. Right. I think you've explained, Nick, how much more comfortable your house is since you've had the air source.
Undoubtedly. I can point out there's a log storage under the fire there in the drawer.
Okay. Right. If there are no particular questions for Nick at the moment, we'll go. If that's all right, we'll go straight on to Owena. I have got a number of questions we can come back to anyway. Okay, Owena, please. Are you unmuted, Owena?
No. Okay. Right. Hello. Okay, so I'm going to talk about our converted barn in Hamsey, which is a work in progress. And just to put a little bit of background, that's me with my sheep. I have a small holding in Hamsey where Ivan and I offer therapy and education to adults and young people. So when this barn became available, we were in a fortunate position to purchase it. We went for it, although it was slight madness in that it's quite a big barn and needs quite a lot of work and renovation. Anyway, having said that, we are there from 2019. We bought it, and if I go to slide 2. Yeah, that's it. So in 1995, the person we bought it from converted this barn into one large dwelling with a little annex on the left, the little wood annex. And it's got a total floor space of 4,000 square feet. So 370 square meters, which is quite a lot to heat. And so my first feeling was, how are we going to manage with heating it in a more sustainable way? So it was heated with an oil boiler, which was situated in the part of the building that we don't live in anymore, because in 2000, the building was divided into 4 dwellings. So there is the little wooden annex to the left, and then straight ahead of you is the brick and clunch, clunch being the chalky stone. That's a 3-bedroom dwelling. And then to the right is the threshing barn, which is where we live. And we can't see it in this photo. But just back from that, on the side is a studio with a little studio flat. And so when it was divided up into 4, it still had this shared heating system, which was all off oil. I didn't say exactly, but in Hamsey, where it is, there's no gas. Great, that's a photo. So we live in the threshing barn on the right, and the studio's on the left with a studio flat. And it had all been insulated with Celotex, so the roof, walls and floor. And most of the windows are double glazed. There are a few, particularly in the clunch, that are not. Right, are we at slide 3 or slide 2? God, doesn't matter. Anyway, we live here and we're trying to renovate it. Slide 4, I think, is probably inside. Okay, there's a bit more detail about what it's like inside. So when we arrived, there was underfloor heating, which had already been installed in the 90s. And this is all open plan and very high ceiling. We do have a wood burner and we try to make sure that our wood is at a moisture level of about 8 or 9%, because I don't know how much you've read about the wood in the research from Norway, where they really found that if you light the fire top down and you make sure you have very dry wood, you produce less pollution and emissions than a smoky fire. So we do still supplement our heating with that at night. And we've got these very large windows which give us some solar heat, passive solar, I believe somebody used earlier. And we've recently put some slate slabs in front of it to try and retain some of that heat during the evening. Right, the next slide. The bathroom and bedroom have underfloor heating, and there's a small radiator, and that's some of the floor insulation, which is 150 mil. We do need to improve on the insulation in the walls and the ceiling, but slide 6. Anyway, our intention was to rationalize this rather complicated heating system, and we wanted to move away from complete dependence on the oil. And so we know Daniel Holloway, who runs DH Solar Engineering, and he came and we talked about where, how and what would work.
Oh, Ina, we haven't got very long.
Okay. Sorry. That's fine. So here we are. This is our heat pump. It's we'll give you the details at the end. And we installed a new cylinder, and it heats. And we had to put new underfloor heating system in the studio. In the main building, the threshing barn, we've kept the same. So now, going on to the next slide. Okay, summing up. Right, we're very pleased we've made a start towards consuming less oil. The air source heat pump supplies our threshing barn and the studio with hot water and heat, and we are comfortable with that. The little annex that we looked at the beginning and the clunch, they're still being heated by oil. The boiler is only 5 years old, so that will probably remain for a little bit longer. And we know that our heating bills are going to alter. I can go into more detail, but I know I've got to speed along, and we are about to install PV panels, and here's some of the information.
All right, just if you leave that, thanks very much, Gwyn. If you leave that slide up for a second, Tim, I've got a question about costs. So what I'd like to do is just run through some of the key questions that people have asked, and I'd like to bring Jason in on this. Are you there, Jason? Well, I can't see you on.
Hello. Yes, I'm here.
We're in a terraced house. We don't have much space. What about the noise with the neighbours? And is it cold sitting beside it? You know, if you've only got a tight space and you're sitting outside near your thing, is it cold? Anyway, Jason, perhaps you just address that set of questions, if that's okay.
Yes, some really good stuff brought up this evening. Thank you for welcoming me along. Yeah, as far as that goes, the things to consider when you're in a terraced house or somewhere with a bit of restricted space is we need to be a metre away from any boundary with regard to an outdoor unit. So from a permitted development point of view, we need to consider that. So always a metre away from a boundary. So that initially, you know, reduces the space. Yes, it does blow cold air out the front. So if you were to sit in front of it, you would get cold. There is the noise problem, and if you use a bona fide installer, they will carry out a decibel test to ensure that you're not going to bother any of your neighbours or be up at night listening to your heat pump. So they are the main sort of considerations when you are placing an outdoor unit. Is number one, metre away from a boundary, that there's no nuisance noise. I mean, some of the newer units now, someone asked earlier how much sort of noise they generate. And ordinarily, we're looking at 45 to 50 decibels at 1 metre, which is sort of on a par with the conversation. So they're not hugely noisy. It is a fan noise. And they do modulate, so they get louder and quieter depending on how hard they're working. So yeah, they're the main considerations, if that answers. Okay.
Somebody's just raised a question, which a question I had myself, because I've got the same problem. I don't have a heat pump yet, but they've currently got an oil combi boiler, but with no hot water cylinder. I've got a combi gas boiler, but it's the problem of trying to find space to locate a cylinder. Can you get a smaller cylinder, or can you put it outdoors, or is there any solution to that?
Okay, yeah, good question again. Cylinder-wise, you've got a few options. So the technology within the industry would be, firstly, a pre-plumbed cylinder, which is a cylinder with everything bolted on. So the controls, the pumps, the filters, all of that bolted on one.
But they're huge, aren't they? Most of those, aren't they?
They are they're 750 millimeters in diameter and around 1.6 meters in height.
It's quite big. It's not going to fit in where an old combi boiler was. If you're going to take
in many cases, perhaps not. There are slimlined options which are thinner but taller. And Dave, thank you, Dave. There is a horizontal, which is the third of those. Again, we put them in a lot of sort of loft spaces or confined spaces. So we literally flip it on its side. It's the same physical dimension as a normal cylinder, so about 650 in diameter, and we go horizontal. But fundamentally, you do need a cylinder unless you're doing just heating. You can just do direct heating, but then we need things like low loss headers or buffer tanks. So yeah,
can you do it without a tank, without a cylinder? Is it possible to have an air source heat pump without a cylinder?
Yes. If you're doing heating only, and of course we have done that, you can do underfloor radiators without a hot water cylinder. There's a large amount of
immersion for your hot water or other system. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. All right. Those were the key ones. Somebody, all right. Well, what's this heat batteries? Sorry, what does this guy?
Like a heat store. I mean, I don't know how much you want me to elaborate. I did latch onto a few things that people brought up. If it's worth
sure. Do go ahead and yeah.
An overview. Just like initially Nick mentioned about his 18-degree internal temperature, which he's happy living at, and many people are, but also many people want to know that they can get to 21, 22 and beyond. It's worth you knowing, again, any bona fide installer or surveyor will come out and it will be designed to -3 outside and 21 degrees inside. That is an industry standard, and we have to guarantee that we can deliver that. If we don't deliver that, then we're obliged to give you money back, basically. So it's worth knowing, if you do install a heat pump, whoever's installing it needs to guarantee that you can reach those temperatures. And that is by doing a room-by-room survey and making sure that your emitters, whether it be a radiator or underfloor, can deliver that size of, or that amount of heat. So yeah, that was worth knowing. What else did I note? The upsizing of Rads, Tim mentioned that. It's a really good point, but also what you find is many people, their radiators weren't sized in the first place. So they think, oh, I'm not going to do it because I'm going to need a radiator 30% bigger than the one I've got. But in fact, a lot of the time, the radiator was just put in because of the size of the window. So in many cases, the radiators are in fact smaller or the same size as what you've already got. So again, that's something that people sometimes misconstrue. But if the heat loss is done properly and the radiators are sized correctly, you might be pleasantly surprised that they're not quite as big as you might think. I am surveying for Warmer Home Sussex and Retrofit Works at the moment, and in fact I've been invited to the webinar that you mentioned earlier, so you might be bored by my dulcet tones once again, but again, a good organisation, and they're all about the right things, so worth attending that as well. I've been installing heat pumps for 12 years, mainly in Sussex, so again I invite any of you people to perhaps speak to, and maybe I'll speak to some of our customers about getting involved in this group, because Robmell is a very popular area for us, Bishopstone, Brighton itself, we do all of Brighton's maintenance on their heat pumps and solar systems. So yeah, there's quite a few of you guys out there that are pioneers of this, so it'd be nice to bring more of you together.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. I mean, there's a few installers around here. You know, not many, but there's a few, and it would be nice to use local installers. And you can, you know, they're the ones I know about are very, you know, are trustworthy, and yeah. Also of interest, I don't know if everybody knows that Barkham. I think Nikki Myers is on the call. I don't know if she is, but Barkham is a pioneering a scheme to get the whole village off oil and onto heat pumps. Hello, Nikki. Which is a fantastic scheme. I mean, you know, it's still in early stages, but without a doubt, am I correct in saying heat pumps are the solution if you are on oil? If you're on gas, yeah, it's maybe, you know, then perhaps needs to be some kind of incentive. But I mean, if you're on oil, there's no question, is there really?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And again, we're very brutally honest with people in my company, and exactly around that. I have mains gas and I have a heat pump, so I have data from the last 12 years on the cost of running both. And fundamentally, gas is 4.5p a kilowatt hour. Electricity is somewhere between 15 and 16p a kilowatt hour. So although an air source might be 3-to-1 efficient, 300% efficient, once you take the unit cost into account, you are pretty much on a par with mains gas. And that's how it is at the moment. What's happening at the moment, though, is we're installing for OVO Energy at the moment. And this is all a pilot scheme run by the government to prove that electrification of our heating is the way to go. So the government is driving us towards full electrification, and that involves heat pumps heavily. So in many situations, yes, heat pump makes sense. In oil, you're exactly right, it does. Oil has become quite cheap recently. Our first customers were pure oil and LPG customers, and it made complete sense for them. And this was before any scheme, any RHI, Green Deal grant, RHPP back in the day. It was before any subsidy. It actually made sense based on just pure running cost. But I would say versus mains gas at the moment, it's not really any cheaper to run, is the honest truth. We've got many hybrid systems as well where we combine both, so we can use air source when the outside air temperature is warmer, and then the gas boilers kick in times like this. But that will change. That will change as time presses on. And if you've got solar, for instance, and if you've got battery backup, etc., that changes the whole dynamics of everything. And I think the key to this is that people have demonstrated with wood burning, with air source, with ground source, with thermal, they all have their place when they're employed in the right sort of building, in the right sort of lifestyle, with the right sort of energy usage and model, the right thermal efficiency, the right distribution. And that's why you need, a good surveyor or good installer to identify what you're trying to achieve and what technology will apply to your building, to your lifestyle.
That's why I think the Warmer Home Sussex, outfit are probably quite a good place to start, aren't they? Because they can look at the whole house and look at what might work in your house, can't they?
Exactly. They're a good team. I mean, we survey for them, we install for them, and we do exactly the same. And we don't charge for the benefit of doing so. But they are a good outfit, and they are set up exactly for the right reasons. So yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, we literally have 3 minutes left.
Can I ask a question about the last of your contributors, which is, she mentioned a radiator in at least one of her rooms. What was that? What heats the radiator or radiators in her house?
The radiators are all heated by the air source heat pump.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we will have radiators in the
It's just in the bathroom. There's a very small radiator. I can't remember the reasoning why, but certainly that's what it's for.
There's one option that hasn't been discussed, which is that if you want to try and get away with smaller radiators because you can't get the big ones in, there are fanned radiators, ones that have a small air fan, electrically driven fan using a little bit of electricity, but you get twice as much heat for a given surface area and a given water temperature in them. And though the heat pumps can be worked at relatively small size radiators, you do pay the price in efficiency. The higher you take the water in the radiator up, the more electricity you will need to generate a given amount of heat. So there is a good reason to have highly efficient radiators, either big ones or fanned ones, or even better, underfloor heating. They will cut your electricity bill quite a lot.
Great. There are loads more questions coming in. But we are struggling because of time. Now, what I'm going to suggest is that I'm happy to stay on for about another 20 minutes, and we can talk about whatever we can talk about with whoever's left. But if anybody has to go, they go. So I'm going to sign off now, and we'll stop the recording, but we'll stay on. I really want to thank our presenters, Nick and Tim, the other Nick and Oena, as well as Jason. If you've got any more questions that we can't answer tonight, please email inquiries@transitiontownlewes.org, which is on our website. We'll try and pass your query on to the person who we feel can best answer it. We'll also have a follow-up sheet of information available on our website and in our newsletter after the series of online talks is finished. There's lots of information also from our previous Eco House events, when we were allowed actually to visit people's houses. I'll put the link in the chat box in a minute. In due course, we'll also provide links to the recording of this and other events in this series. And we'll put the link on our website and in our newsletter. The next session in this series is next Thursday, where we're talking about the cheapest and simplest ways of making a difference, which is insulation. Do sign up for it if you haven't already. Tickets seem to be going fast, like they did for this one, but there are still a few left. So I would like to say thank you. And Tim, if you'd like to stop the recording, and anybody would like to go, bye, and thank you very much for coming. But anybody want to stay on? We'll go through the chat box and try and answer these remaining questions. Thank you.